Open hearts, open mind. Welcome to the Sattva channel, the official platform of the Sattva project. I'm Shara Wong, the co-founder of the Sattva project. So first of all, we would like to express our thankfulness to our media partner and StreamYard sponsor, Durian ASEAN and Durian FM. And not to forget also an important person behind the scene, Brother Ray, who is our broadcast director today. So Ray, would you like to say hi to our audience?
Hello everyone, welcome to the Daily Dharma series. Please like and share this with more people. And if you are watching this later on YouTube, do subscribe to our channel, like and share the video. Now back to you, brother.
Thanks, Ray. So today we have a Daily Dharma series supposed to be moderated by Ram, but he's not here today. So today's topic is mistaken views and misconceptions about Buddhism. Let me give you a brief introduction about who the speakers are today. Okay. Our first contributor will be Dr. Mattia Vasylieva. Mattia is an Ukrainian Dharma translator and interpreter. She's a graduate of the Rangjung Yeshe Institute of Kathmandu University, where she currently works as an interpreter and instructor. She holds a PhD in political science and currently is studying for her second PhD in Buddhist studies in the International Buddhist College in Thailand. Welcome, Maria.
Hello, everyone. Glad to see you.
Okay, thank you, Maria. And then our next speaker will be Dr. Mattia Salvini. Dr. Mattia Salvini presently is a Dean of Scriptural Languages and the Faculty of the Liberal Arts at International Buddhist College, Thailand. More info, ibc.ac.th. And his BA and MA Sanskrit he has BA and MA Sanskrit from RKM Vivekananda College, Chennai, India. He also holds a PhD in Buddhist study from the School of Oriental and African Studies, SOAS, London. Welcome to the Mattia.
Thank you, Sawadee.
After so long, welcome to the Mattia. And our next contributor will be Dr. Giuliano Giustarini. He holds a PhD in Indological Studies from University of Turin. He has an MA in Indian Religions and Philosophies, La Spallanzani, University of Rome, and he's a lecturer at the International PhD program in Textual Buddhist Studies, Mahindo University. He's now translator and lecturer at the Fondazione Madria. Welcome, Dr. Giuliano.
Hello to everybody. Hello, Sharma.
Hi. Our next contributor will be Bibek Sharma. Bibek Sharma was born in Nepal, finished his BA Buddhist Studies in International Buddhist College, IBC, Thailand. Further, he completed his MA Buddhist Studies in Fo Guang University, Taiwan, where he learned classical Buddhist Chinese and translated correspondence between Kumarajiva and Huiyuan to complete his MA thesis. For his PhD, he joined Mahindo University, where he is currently working on Yasumitra's Abhidhammakosha's Vyakya, a sub-commentary on the Abhidhammakosha Bhashya, to complete his PhD thesis. Currently, Bibek is translating the first chapter of Abhidhammakosha Bhashya as translated by Xuanzang for BDK, Japan. He reads Chinese, Sanskrit, Pali, Hindi, and French, apart from his own mother tongue, Nepali. Welcome, Bibek Sharma.
Thank you, Sharab.
Thank you. I believe Ram is already in, so I can feel more relief now. So let me introduce about who is Ram. Brother Ray, can you give me the screen? Okay, our moderator today will be Ram Narula. He's our dialogue coordinator of Sattva Youth. He is a programmer, network specialist, IT consultant, and public group discussion facilitator with passions in meditation, exploring reality, chasing natural hot spring pools, and doing nothing. Having lived and worked in both Asia and the West with a master degree in IT from University of Liverpool, now also a certified Aristotle's Cafe discussion facilitator. Welcome, Ram Narula.
Hello, sorry, I came a bit late. I'm here finally.
Okay, thank you for your presence, Ram.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Ram.
Hi,
Yes.
Ram.
Sorry, I came a bit late. Yes, shall I take over, Brother Sharab?
He's not here, so yes.
Oh, okay. So, so I will introduce. I will welcome everybody first. That's what I'm supposed to do, right? Please confirm.
It's already done.
Already done.
Oh,
Already
okay,
done.
it's all done. Okay, so we shall start then.
Yes,
Oh,
please.
yes.
Okay, last time we went over the Kamala Sutta, and we went through very profound answers or discussion, which came down to pretty much we cannot take things out of context. I think that was my understanding. Is that point? I am correct on this point. We should take everything in context within the Buddhist realm, and we should come with a fresh mind and not try to compare too much. At least in the beginning, we can use some logics and our existing knowledge as an entrance point when we want to study Buddhism. And so last week was more about disbelieving, why Buddha taught actually not to actually disbelieve, but to use our critical thinking skills. That's what I comprehend before we decide to believe or to do anything actually. And this week, I would propose something slightly different, but also on the same line. How about selflessness and nihilism? I have heard so many people, and including myself in the beginning, that, okay, selflessness in Buddhism, perfect. So once I try to understand selflessness, then I don't have to do anything, right? Okay, there's no love, there's nothing to do because there's nobody to suffer. Um, uh, uh, what do you have to say about this? I mean, who would want to take my side and who wants to defend a different perspective on this? Maybe I need one person to stand with me on my side. Who would be the volunteer here?
Nobody will be
Well,
on your side, Ram.
yes, side is wrong with you, Ram. Sorry. You a tirtika. No possible.
Oh, okay. So I will take this this side then. So I'm saying, yeah, okay. So since everything is selfless, I don't have to do anything anymore. I can do whatever I want. Which karma is gonna affect me? So there's no me to start with. So come on. So now you all can shoot at me. Who would like to have a go?
Mahayanis do not
We
shoot.
can't shoot at you. You don't exist.
How can we answer to you if you don't
Peaceful.
exist at all?
Actually,
You never
I
asked
exist,
the
but I'm
question.
selfless. You know, I appear, but I'm ultimately I'm selfless. So.
Okay, I think Mattia should start. Tell him.
Yeah, I vote for
Please.
Mattia too.
Okay. But you started with one thing and then went to another. Because you started by saying selflessness and nihilism, and then it was more about selflessness and not having any result to one's actions. So do you think that these two things are the same thing? Sadikap? Ram, the question was for you.
What was the question again? I lost the connection just now.
The question was, you started saying that you wanted to talk about selflessness and nihilism, and then you said that because of selflessness, there's no result to my actions, even though there is my own enjoyment and I can do what I want. So do you think that nihilism is the same as denying results for actions, and if so, why?
Okay. Nihilism is about not believing, right? So I don't believe in the consequence or of my actions. And
Who
in that
told you that
case,
nihilism is about not believing? Isn't that skepticism?
so nihilism is about not believing in the results, no? In the result
Is
of
it?
karma.
I don't know. I have doubts about this usage of this word personally.
Okay.
Maybe you would like to say believing in not existence of karma rather
Okay.
than believing. I think if I can rephrase your statement, Ram.
Okay. That's that could be helpful. Yes. Okay. So let's say I'm selfless, so my action should have no consequence.
That would be a self-contradiction.
Okay. How so?
Because you said, I am selfless.
Okay.
So if you're accepting that you are an I at any level, then at that level you should accept that your actions should have consequences towards that I, whichever level of existence you ascribe to it.
Okay. So if my action have consequences, where does it fall on? Does it fall on the I, or does it fall on the selfless, or which aspect, or where does it fall on?
Both on the selfless I.
On this. Okay. On the selfless I. Let me think. That's a very deep answer. And is this I real or permanent? This is the question I should put to myself, right?
Yes, it's not real, it's not permanent according to a certain view.
Okay. Okay. So now I'm starting to doubt my own I or my own self. So okay. So now if it's self if you know if there's this notion of selflessness, can I call it a notion, or should I call it a concept?
Yeah, either one, I think personally, is a good word.
Okay, if I call it the concept of selflessness, how does karma work on selflessness?
If I may stand one moment with the Ram and to support his view a little bit, it's like I think the question could also be in terms of if there is nobody who is going to inherit the fruit of my actions. So there is nobody that will pay for what I did. So
That's
there
true,
will be
but
no
that's
Yeah.
not how he phrased it.
Hmm?
He
Sorry, Mattia.
said, if I am selfless. He didn't say if there is
No,
nobody.
okay, I'm
That's different.
rephrasing that. Of course, I'm standing on his point with a different wording to say that perhaps we may start with the view that if there is whether I say I'm selfish or not. So let's keep a semantic in a way, and let's just say that okay, who is going to inherit the consequences of my actions? If there is nobody to inherit it, I think that's one of the common objections. I don't know if Ram agrees with that. But one of the common misconceptions is that okay, there's nobody who's going to be reborn. There is nobody who's going to inherit the karma and so on. And actually, it was one of the, in a way, one of the positions of the Uchedavadins. There is
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what that was my initial point. I wanted to distinguish between the word nihilism and the idea of Uchedavada, because although there might be some relation between these two, the word nihilism is a much broader word, and it can refer to different positions which are not necessarily related to Uchedavada, and what say vice versa. because one could argue that the standard proponents of nihilism, of Uchedavada in India, were not really nihilists, because they believed in the existence of a Mahabhutas, for example. So I think that these two things should be somewhat clarified. Otherwise, we are mixing up different ideas, and then it's not too precise or clear.
Okay, understood. So it's a
would
matter
you,
of translation then.
yeah, would you clarify a little bit the notion of Uchedavada, Mattia?
You could do it, Giuliano. You started.
I just asked. Don't do that. I'm asking you ask back. So.
Okay, I'll tell you my understanding. Uchedavada is one of the two extremes, is regarded as the worst form of wrong view, and it is the view that at death, consciousness, the continuum of consciousness completely stops, and there is no rebirth, and there is no continuity of karmic cause and effect. So usually when one speaks of Uchedavada, one might also be someone who believes in consequences, but not specifically in karmic consequences. So there's lots of people who believe that there are consequences to what they do within this life, or even in the lives of future human beings. But if I don't believe that there will be consequences in terms of karma within the continuity of one's own stream of consciousness, that actually falls under Uchedavada. So I wanted to clarify this point because I have observed that sometimes things are presented to make them maybe a little bit more digestible, and maybe it's also reasonable, but they're presented in such a way that as long as you believe that there's consequences to your actions, you are not falling into wrong view. But in fact, it is something more specific, and it does have to do with karma and rebirth. So that's why in order to answer genuinely to your question, Ram, I feel that if it were a little bit more specific, I would personally find it easier.
Okay, thank you. So my question would be, how does karma works on the selflessness? How are they related, and how does it play out?
Well, maybe just I think things are selfless in the sense that things do not have their own intrinsic nature, that it functions in the relative level. So if the things existed permanently and they had their own swabhavas or intrinsic natures, then it would not even have any interaction at all. There was no cause and effect at all. The fact that there is cause and effect is because these things are selfless. I'm turning the table now.
Okay. Anyone else want to add on this?
I I just wanted to
Please.
little bit redirected, because I think the whole problem with nihilism here is how selflessness is being understood. And actually, the Buddha pointed it out some 2,500 years ago when he said that the main problem of beings is that they either think that things exist or things do not exist, right? So this is the problem. So it's like we think that we have a self, right? This is everyone thinks so, ordinary beings. This is our misconception. So when beings heard that there is no self, immediately they fall into another extreme, right? So this is the problem. So then selflessness is misunderstood as nothingness. There is nothing. No self means nothing, right? But I mean, this is just a problem of ordinary individual who always thinks in terms of extremes. And what is more, when such beings approach Buddhist philosophy, they do not try to understand the language which is used. This is the main problem, I think, because language in Buddhist logic is not intuitive, it is technical, and thus it has to be learned. One has to apply diligence in order to learn it. So thus, if you ask what is selflessness by definition, yeah, then it would say like, or what is emptiness by definition? Like I would say, like as it is said in Tibetan, takchedan dralva, it is free from permanence and like existence and non-existence. So what is selflessness? It is freedom from existence and non-existence, both. And this brings us to even other level of the four extremes, because unlike Western philosophy formed by Aristotle in what 4th century BCE, who had this, three rules of logic. As you know, like the first one is what, a rule of non-contradiction, right? And the second one is the, how to call in English, the rule of excluded third, right? So basically, according to Aristotle logic, it is either existent or non-existent, and the third option is impossible. And actually, Buddhist philosophy and Eastern philosophy in general doesn't function like this, because Buddhism is based on what is called what is chaturanta? Is it in Sanskrit? Mushi, the four extremes, or like
Chatuskoti.
Chatushkoti is the Mushi, and Tashi, yeah, the chaturanta. So it is either existent.
Chatushkoti. I think Chatushkoti you mean.
Chatushkodi is Mushi, and Tashi is Chaturanta, I think. Anyway, so it's being, non-being, both being and non-being, and neither being and non-being, right? And this is something very different from how the Western logic functions. And the problem with people that in the 20th century, they still think in the way Aristotle told them to think, right? So what is logical? Just ask yourself, what is logical for you? Logical, it is either existent or non-existent. So it's either a cat or it is a dog. It cannot be both, right? The third option cannot be something third. So that's why if we think that there is a self and we are told there is no self, immediately we fall into another extreme. And this is the main problem, right? And beings who approach Buddhist philosophy, they don't go for definition. So they don't try to find out what is meant by selflessness or what is the definition of selflessness, because if they look for it, they will find out that by definition, it is freedom from existence and non-existence, both, right? Or if we elaborate on it, it's freedom from the four extremes, all the four options. So this is very different from you have just said, right? So actually, nihilism has nothing to do with selflessness. It's just one of the things it is free from, because it is free from non-existence as well. You see, so this is how I see it, and this is the problem that I find with it, and how Westerners specifically have a problem with it, yeah? Because they do not try to understand the language, to learn the language, what is meant by certain terms.
Wow, that's a very, very good answer. So I think, many of you have said that it relates to translation problem also, and grammar problem, and also language problem, and also conceptual problems and limitations based on languages as well. So when we talk about selfless, there's a word less there, so we usually tend to think towards negation. I think that's the general tendency, even for myself. But I don't think it's
Maybe I'll
specifically
just,
a
sorry,
Western
Ram.
problem.
Maybe I'll just interrupt you here because you used the word negation. In your initial question, I think the problem was over negation. So when you said that I do not exist, hence there is no karma, what you were saying was you were over negating more than what was necessary. Yes, that I was never there. It is called parikalpita. So it is just an imagined thing. So I was never there from the beginning to begin with, right? But that does not mean that the continuum of your five aggregates and all the consequences that can happen with certain actions is not there. That does not exactly mean there in the relative level, right? So in the relative level, the 5 aggregates was there. The imputation of the what we call atma or self or I-ness was never there. It was like a horn of a rabbit. So to begin with, so I think that was primarily the problem of over negation, in my opinion, in your initial question.
Maria, you have something on this?
Yes, because the horny rabbit is not proper example. Because horned rabbits, this is something which non-existent altogether and impossible example. But here we speak about confusion, so it's different. It's not that it is non-existent altogether, but it is just a example of confused perspective when we think that there is a self. Yes, so it's like label that we have. So it's misconception that we have. So it's different from saying comparing it with a horned rabbit, which I usually call horny rabbit, just for fun,
No,
which
I
is
compared the
completely
the horn
non-existent.
of a rabbit with the eye, the eye that was never there.
Okay. I think this is not only a Western problem, like Maria said. She was targeting more, not targeting, but that's maybe her observation. But I think it's also a very much Eastern problem, especially. I mean, I live in Thailand, and I kind of sense this dilemma occurring quite often amongst Buddhists here, even, and it can be
So
used
only
as some
Africans don't
excuse.
have this problem.
So
No, but I think this is just a manifestation of how, unfortunately, the East was affected by the West. And it is not something new. For example, there was this guy, Ibn Sina, Persian. Yeah? So he said something like, I think he said something like, he was the great fan of Aristotle. Yeah? So he said that anyone who denies the law of non-contradiction should be beaten and burned until they accept that being burned and not being burned are two different things. Yeah? So he was Persian, but he was contaminated by this Aristotle's logic. Yeah. So this is
But
what we see in the East as well. Yeah, they just contaminated. It's not your nature,
sorry,
actually.
Ajahn Mattia?
it should be pointed out that actually most interpreters of Nagarjuna would say that, in fact, Nagarjuna definitely accepts the law of the excluded middle, and this law is in fact also explicitly accepted in a number of Buddhist texts.
Yeah, but I'm more referring to something, when Nagarjuna says that the nature of things is there no nature. Something like that,
Yes,
And
yeah,
their
yeah.
only
But this
nature is
does
there no nature.
this doesn't
Yes.
that doesn't involve any contradiction.
Yes, I see, but I know that it doesn't because this is just the way his logic works. But I just imagine if he means Avicenna, Abincina, he will be burned and beaten until he accepts that nature and no nature are two different things.
It could be, I hope not.
You see, so this is what I try to say. The selflessness and as being, if it is non-existent, means, if it is non-existent with nothingness, it's something like that. Yeah, so it's like it's either one or another. This is how the misconception functions. So that's the problem, right?
But actually, that's how it works exactly in Madhyamaka, because the refutation of the ultimate existence on entities is precisely because you don't have a third possibility. The main refutation is because things are neither one nor many, and the solution there is not that you can have a third one, that a third type of property which can be ascribed to entities. The fact that this refutation works is precisely because of the law of excluded middle. And I think that with the exception of those who adopt what is called dialetheia, so namely J. Garfield and Graham Priest, almost every interpreter of Madhyamaka, I believe, would agree that, yeah, there is no contradiction involved. contradiction is even considered the mark of something being an imperfect teaching traditionally in all Buddhist traditions, and is used to evaluate whether something is Buddha Vachana. So, in fact, this is how there is a distinction between Buddhist and non-Buddhist teachings, according to many masters. The teachings of a Buddha can be shown to be perfect because there is no mutual contradiction between them, while the teachings of the non-Buddhist masters can be shown not to be perfect because there is contradiction between what they say earlier and what they say later. So if we, on the other hand, disavow the law of the excluded middle, this all criteria falls. See? So I'm not really sure that that is the problem.
I mean that they do not accept the definition of emptiness or selflessness as being free from both existence and non-existence. You see what I mean? So
That
for
is
them, it's
fine,
either
but that's a
one
little
or
different.
another. Yes,
But
but
that's
this is
not
the way
about the
how
excluded
mind
middle.
is functions.
Fine, but that is not about the excluded middle, and it cannot be ascribed to Aristotle's faulty logic. That is the problem of that they think that it's either this way or that way, but you cannot ascribe that to a flaw in Aristotle's logic, saying that this law of excluded middle is not accepted in the East as a whole. This, I'm sorry, but I cannot agree with.
No, don't say that it is not accepted, but it is more than that. That's what I'm saying, what I'm trying to say.
Okay, but my point is that is not so much about the excluded middle. I think maybe there is something else going on there.
But then maybe you can comment on the definition of selflessness or emptiness to make it clear what is meant, because usually it is misunderstood, right? So this is where all the problem come from, that it is misunderstood as either one or another. It is freedom from both. It's freedom from all the extremes, and somehow we forget about it, right? So this is the main issue.
Yes, Achan Mattia, so can you maybe, on top of
Yeah,
your
but
head, say the
it's true
definition
also
of
that if we go
selflessness?
like that,
Can you?
well, there's
Or is it?
several definitions, and this is the problem.
Okay.
So that's one of the things. I personally like the way Maria has presented it because that's the one that I'm inclined towards. But in that way, we already go towards Madhyamaka. And I think that the initial question was something more basic, perhaps. That was my impression. So if the
Yes,
mind and
indeed. And
body
Marie has addressed
continue,
that already.
so if we use the more basic definition, is about the mind and body continuum, which is then explained in terms of 5 aggregates or collections of impermanent entities. If there is no continuing identity that we can pinpoint, continuing eternal identity that we can pinpoint in these 5 aggregates, then we have already reached a view of selflessness. Of course, then there are further steps, and these further steps can be harmonized with what Maria was saying earlier, namely not grasping at existence and non-existence, etc. But I think the basic problem that we had been discussing was about this when we don't have ultimately real identity through time, how do we understand causal continuities? How do we even identify causal continuities? That, I think, is the basic problem. And this is a problem in the sense that you can observe that even within the Buddhist tradition, everyone agrees on karma, but when it comes to exactly explaining how karma functions, how the continuity of karma is ensured, then we can find significant differences between schools.
Okay. May I ask Achan Giuliano? Maybe you can
But Giuliano has been very
share.
quiet. So I think that Giuliano.
Please, Achan Giuliano, maybe you can share some of your great knowledge.
While listening, I was thinking of some discussion that I actually had with some Buddhists that, in a way, use the idea of non-self in order to not to propose a kind of nihilism, but I would say maybe some idea that match the Uchedavada. Uchedavada as in the Buddhist times. No? So Ucheda, so yeah, maybe one step back. Ucheda means to cut off, no? The cutting off of something. So believing that something actually exists or that the self exists, and then at that disappears. So this is in a way the mistake. So it's actually the passage from existence to non-existence. So it's not about a definition of what identity is, but it's the belief that there is something and that something disappears. And that's something that I found in some modern Buddhist discussions, in a way similar to what we can see in the Uchedavadins. And that reminds me of that passage when the Buddha actually doesn't explain anatta, answers only by staying silent, by remaining silent, because he says that if he says that the self exists, of course there is the Sassatavada, there is the so-called eternalism and so on. But even if he says that there is anatta, the anatta will be interpreted as a sort of Uchedavada. So I had something, so the interlocutor would think, I had something, and now I don't have it anymore. So I think this is in a way one position where we can find the possible mistakes. You know, they're actually exchanging anatta or anatman in Buddhism as a sort of extinction of something, or the ending of something. So it's in a way it's a belief in ending of something, and I think that in a way there are two parts of the same misconception. If I believe that there is something, I also believe that when I don't see that, it doesn't exist anymore. So once I believe in existence, in complete eternal existence, I also believe in non-existence, in a way.
Yes.
And maybe if in a way to reuse the refutation of Maria to, I wouldn't say to Aristotle, but to the position of tertium non datur, no? That there is no third position. No? And actually there is a third position, which is in a way the understanding of anatta. But the Buddha himself was in a way had to face this dichotomy of existing and then non-existing anymore. In this sense, what I heard in these discussions that I happen to be in, there is the idea that, okay, there cannot be any fruit of the karma because actually there's nobody that survives that, and therefore nobody is going to inherit the karma in the future. And I think that this is the misunderstanding of anatta as an ucheda, as a cutting off. It's not that what is a self already does not exist, but that there is a self and that is not going to exist anymore. There is something solid, and that's when I can't see that solid thing anymore, so these aggregates and so on, at that point there must be some nothingness, and therefore nobody to inherit the karma. So if I should try to represent the misconception in any possible way, Mattia, I think that there is a stream in your room.
Yes, I'm hearing it. I think Sharab, you should you should censor this small fountain.
Bee or waterfall?
Yeah. Sharab's
Something like
waterfall is too powerful.
Oh, okay, not from Sharab. Okay, maybe it's the selfless stream of life that goes on in this discussion.
Yes. Okay, so I want to track back a little bit. As Ajay Mattia have said that Maria's view was from more Madhyamaka. Yes, I think on the Vaibhashika views, they address some existence like the the what was it? The subtle particles, right? And in other schools, they have some other approaches, and some sort of like mind ultimately exists. And so there's actually several different approaches, and not just beyond the two extremes and of existence and non-existence. Is that did I understand correctly, Mattia?
Yes, I mean that everyone agrees of the idea that the world relies on these two extremes, existence and non-existence. Everyone agrees because this is in the sutras. This is words of a Buddha, and every Buddhist regards that as being authoritative. The difference comes when one starts discussing exactly what is being negated by those two words, existence and non-existence. And this is not identical in different Buddhist systems. That's why we have several different systems of Buddhist philosophy. So, but I wanted to mention this, that we started straight away with selflessness. And you presented it almost like it's a casual topic of discussion, that like someone comes and says, oh, you're selfless, and then the response is, oh, okay, then I can do what I want, and that's how life works. But I think that's not how it works in the Buddhist tradition. One of the first teachers that I learned from, Samdon Rinpoche, you can see in one of his books where he presents Buddhist meditation, he mentions that from a certain perspective, for most of us who have a very coarse mind and we don't have any level of samadhi, actually, even this difference between self and no self is not a big difference. Like, our mind normally is so coarse and involved with such coarse level of experience that to disentangle even whether and to which level there is an I is extremely difficult. And you can see also that the topic of selflessness is often introduced with great care in the Buddhist tradition, not to say anything about the topic of emptiness, precisely because of a type of misunderstanding that you were kind of, for the sake of discussion, upholding in the beginning. But what I want to try to convey is that sometimes we, instead of straight away speaking of selflessness, it's a little bit more interesting, to me at least, to discuss how is selflessness approached within the Buddhist tradition. Because sometimes the build-up is just as important or even more important than the final statement of the view. Otherwise, I feel there is a slight risk that we kind of trivialize it. The selflessness is a very big thing from a Buddhist perspective. It's really, really something. It's a bit like this. If I can use an example to explain, the same teacher I was referring to was saying that when people decide to practice meditation in the Buddhist tradition, they have to take it very seriously. So if we want to practice shamatha, let's say, we have to clean the room. Because the moment we start practicing meditation, many deities are going to come to our room. And this is shamatha. Once we have mastered shamatha, we get more into selflessness. So my suggestion is that we started straight away with selflessness without cleaning the room. And maybe we could go a few steps back and think about how this is approached.
Thank you for sharing the suggestion or how it should be practiced. But I would like to ask maybe Giuliano, in the Pali tradition, is there a common way of starting with the wisdom approach and then goes to the meditation after? With some wisdom approach, say the right view, which focuses on selflessness first?
I think yes and no. Yes, to some point, it's also an initial teaching in a way. So there should be a kind of initial right view. I'd say that most of the beginner's view is based on saddha, no, on faith, because there is no actual understanding. But the direction should be good from the very beginning. So there are cases, when actually one has a misconception, and that person is harshly corrected by the Buddha or by any disciple of the chief disciples. And so the right view is important from the very beginning. On the other hand, there is also important thing to know that although it's important to have a right view, one should know that once there is a kind of understanding, there is still the anusaya. No, there is still the I would say the hidden tendency to believe in a self. So, of course, I would say there is a right understanding at the beginning, but that's not the goal. Even the correct understanding levels of understanding that one reaches several points, actually they are not the actual God, because one has to, I would say, through samatha or whatever, anyway, the samadhi part, or to the better focusing and better investigation of things, one should actually eradicate the anusaya themselves. Because I'm saying that because I think that we may all agree, okay, there is no self, but the outcome, I think, for most of us is not that we are arahants because of that. So
Yes.
there is still, in a way, a part of us that still believes that there is a self and still
Okay.
clings to an idea of a self, to
Yes.
or idea or anyway a sense of the self. And maybe it's not an idea because intellectually we may agree, we may have a right view that is reinforced by readings, reinforced by reflection, and to some extent also by meditation. But there is a deeper level of work that should be done. So yeah, to answer shortly to shortly answer to your question, I think that yes, it's important initial understanding, but also it's important to know that whatever kind of level one has reached, there is still the task to eradicate the anusayas, so that the deepest root of misunderstanding or ignorance.
And it is the part that suffer or have to suffer the consequence of karma, right? Or bear the consequence of karma.
The part that suffers.
Yes,
So you
the
mean,
part that bear the consequence of karma, the subtle part that you're referring to, that we have to eliminate.
okay, no, I wouldn't say the part that suffers. So that is the point when we suffer in a way. I think that suffering is created at many levels, but it's also created intellectually. So I think if I dare I sustain a position of self view. In that case, I think I'm even, I would say, almost hopeless, because I don't even try to eradicate the anusaya. So if there is a moha as a as an anusaya, I know that I need to work on that. But if actually I endorse my anusaya, my moha itself, explicitly endorse moha, I'm not inclined to question it, to investigate it, and to eradicate it. So I
Okay.
think that it's worse, of course. So at some level, we still suffer when there is a moha or avidya as an anusaya. On the other hand, if we if we not only is hidden by even explicit, I may just support that part. So I don't want to listen to you. I just think, okay, but there is a self, of course. I am me. So what are you saying? And I am me against you. I also reinforce this mechanism of self-defense.
Okay, thank you. Now maybe to other speakers here, I want to ask, since in Thailand especially, this is more Theravada majority of practitioners and institutions here. It's common that the Milinda Panha is studied here. It's pretty common, and especially to use it as a explanation for or a pointer to selflessness. How about other traditions which you are accustomed to? Is there such a text or similar text pointing to this direction? And is it emphasized in the beginning or not? Yes, Bibek.
Yeah. So first of all, there is one sutta called Yogananda Sutta. You can check the sutta where the Buddha says that samatha and vipassana, the calm abiding and the insight meditation, could be practiced in, I think, 3 or 4 different ways. First samatha, after vipassana, then first vipassana after samatha, and you can also practice them together, and so on and so forth. So actually, the emphasis on one way, first calm and then samatha or whatever, depends upon, I think, the traditions. Right, number one. And number two, coming to your point of selflessness, for example, right now, you are listening, I am saying, and everything is happening. But the fact that we think that we exist is our imputation. It is not the problem of what is happening due to cause and conditions, right? This is the second point I would like to. Third point about the selflessness. For example, in the Abhidharma Kosha, which is the tradition of Sarvastivada, it is explicitly explained why the Buddha taught skanda, aggregate, ayatana, the entrance, and the dhatu basis. Why? What was the reason behind these 3 teachings? And these are all related with how certain people construct the idea of or impute the idea of atma or self on some of these let's say relatively existing things. For example, let's say the Buddha taught skanda, the teachings of aggregate, because some people they impute atma or the self on the mental factors, like for example vedana, samgya, and samskara. I think, right? Some people they have different type of delusion, and they impute this self on the form. That's why the Buddha taught the teachings of ayatana, for example. And why the Buddha taught the teachings of 18 dhatus is because some people take form and consciousness as self. They grasp onto that. So to extend on this thing, what we understand is that the self was actually never there, and it was just imputed out of delusion. What we Achan Giuliano was saying, the moha or the anushaya, in the perhaps in the Mahayana we call it like innate grasping. So sahaja atmagraha. We have a very tendency to grasp one of these things as I and mine. Right? That is the main problem. It is not that these things are happening due to cause and effects. They were always happening. But the idea that there is something concrete having the self nature was our imputation, our moha, our avidya. That was the problem from the beginning. That's why this like initial cause becomes perhaps the effect, and that becomes the cause and effect, and that becomes the cause and effect. This continuum of cause and effect never stops. What stops is the idea or the imputation of whether something intrinsically exists or not, whether something is I or mine or not. That is something that is removed by the path of of the Buddhist tradition. but the cause and effect itself keeps on happening on their own, right? So
did I understand
more or
correctly
less,
that are you saying that the imputation is not from cause and effect? Is that, did I hear correctly?
well, imputation is a kind of a cognitive problem, error, that you thought that there was, let's say, right now I'm speaking to you as a prithakjana, as a an unenlightened person. I think that Vivek, I am speaking, but actually it is just a process that is happening. If we really examine who is speaking, there was no one who was speaking from the point of view of, let's say, the ultimate. But in the relative level, and because of my own delusion, I think that I exist and I am the one who is speaking all the time. So that's
But
what
does
I'm
this
trying to say.
imputation have a cause? It has a cause, right?
Well, that cause is the innate grasping to yourself, you can say, or it's a avidya or moha.
Yes,
Of course,
it's still
nothing happens.
it's still cause and effect, right? The effect is the imputation, and the cause is moha, for example. I mean, in this case.
I think you can say that. I think you can say that.
Okay, Maria, I think you have something to add.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I just wanted to say that I would not equal avidya to moha, because avidya is more than that. It is not recognition of how things truly are. And this is what defines sentient beings. So if you ask, who is a sentient being? This is the one who doesn't know how the things are, by definition. And it is said that it's just from the very first moment, being does not recognize the true nature. And this is what we call co-emergent ignorance that Bibek referred to. And then imputation of self and others come later. So imputational, labeling, whatever you call it, imaginary, is the second step. So thus this ignorance, it is there from the very beginning. And this is what defines a sentient being, which distinguishes between sentient beings and Buddhas who are not confused. So then, if you ask why beings are confused, was it in Calling the Guru from Afar by Jimbon Kuntrul Rinpoche when he says, why Buddhas are not confused and why beings got confused? Or is it Kuzang Manlam, aspiration of Samantha Badra? So basically, this is a very profound question, right? But nevertheless, this is where the root is. So then this avidya, or not knowing how things are, this is what starts the whole links, right? The 12 links, etc. And then self, as we understand, yeah. So like the idea is why, who is experiencing karma? It can be explained by many schools differently, right? Like for example, that the last moment in consciousness in this life conditions the next moment of consciousness in the next life, right? So there is a continuity. Or the only school, in my opinion, who actually explained it was the one who posited alaya, yeah, alaya vijnana. This is the only proper explanation of how karma works, in my opinion. And I think this is the only tangible, something tangible that we can refer to, right? So they are like something which preserves our habitual tendencies, the seeds, and then they grow in the next life. Yeah, but then are they truly established? No. Yeah? So is karma truly established? No. Is the self who experiences karma truly established? No. Right. So it's illusory being who experiences illusory karma, right, and experiences illusory suffering. So none of it is truly there, right? But nevertheless, until the being is confused as to the true nature of things, not recognizing the true nature of things, the being experiences suffering, right? So this is what the Buddha said. The first very thing he said, know the suffering, right? And then get rid of the cause of suffering, abandon the cause of suffering. So that's why, first of all, we need to understand that it all goes back to clinging to self, right? So like, what is suffering? Suffering is happened because of negative karma we accumulate. Negative karma is caused by afflictions. Afflictions come down to clinging to self. So this is the root of everything. So this is most important. That's why the Buddha said, don't ask me these questions of self and no self, because I teach you there is suffering, there is cause of suffering, there is cessation, there is the path. Right? So this is most important. So that's why I think all the rest for us is just more theoretical thing. It's important to figure out what is the true nature of things is, to develop true conceptual view about it. This is how it is explained, right? Because this is what prepares a being for direct perception of the true reality of things. But if you ask, is it the first thing to do? The answer would be, it depends on the capacities of beings. So in Tibetan tradition, starting from Atisha, it is like really emphasized that there are three types of beings: lower capacities, middling capacities, and higher capacities. And as the being of higher capacities can approach emptiness directly, selflessness directly, all the rest, they cannot. They need to do homework, preparatory work. Yeah, so what we need to do? Purify obscurations, gather accumulations. This is it, right? Then recognize emptiness directly. So this is how I see it, right? That's why this question of who is experiencing karma, the one who is confused is experiencing karma. How it is experienced, it can be explained in many ways. None of those is ultimate truth. All the explanations are relative. Because ultimately, there's no karma. There's no one who experiences it. Does it help us? No, it doesn't. Why? Because we are relative beings, right? And we are stuck in relative concepts. So it is important to distinguish the two. So this is how I would answer it.
Yes, I think maybe I can add a little bit if you don't mind. There's no karma and there's no karma also. So it's like if we go into that realm.
I wouldn't put it like that. I would put there is no truly existing karma, no truly non-existing karma, right? But there is karma which is relatively experienced as a confused perception until we have clinging to self, right? So these are two different things. Once again, we come down to language, right? What do we mean by existence and non-existence? Once again, right? This is where we started with you the discussion. We need to find out the meaning of the language because it is technical. It's not intuitive.
Agreed. Maybe Ajahn Mattia, back to the question of the text, and I don't know if you remember the question about the Milinda Panha equivalent in other traditions, in the other traditions other than Theravada. Is there such a text, and when is it emphasized, or any other text like maybe Abhidharma Kosha or something?
Yes, Milinda Panha. Yeah.
Oh, all the same text being used?
Yes.
And at what stage is it being introduced?
Well, first
this
of all,
text?
there is the Nagasena Bhikshu Sutra. It exists. The Nagasena Bhikshu Sutra is preserved in Chinese translation. What do you mean state?
Like since you mentioned that
Ram, what?
Since you mentioned that the practitioner
Ram,
starts from
can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I think there is a
No,
problem.
I was talking about but there's a problem with the you were asking about the text, but so I was just saying the text. There is a text exists, Nagasena Bhikshu Sutra. It's preserved in Chinese. It's translated also.
And when is it introduced to the practitioner?
I don't think it's fixed because in general, this text, of course, I don't know the Chinese tradition, therefore I'm not sure that it is ever introduced. But the ideas similar to the Milinda Panha are found in a number of texts. They're even found in the Prasannapada, because or in the Pratitya Samutpada Hridayakarika Vyakhyanam, the term Anga, when we say Dwadashanga, the 12 parts of dependent arising, is explained like the parts of a chariot, Rathangavat. So you can see that this idea occurs in a number of texts, and of course is not very far from the contents of the Abhidharma Kosha. In the case of Abhidharma Kosha, it is said that the first 8 chapters present the selfless dharmas, and the last chapter, Pudgala Vinishya, is the one which presents selflessness. And there's something similar, I think, we could say in the Panchaskandaka, because we get to the Dharmata only once we are in the Asamskrita. And there's something similar also in the 30 verses, because we get really to selflessness in the Yogacara sense when we get to the section on the 3 natures. So usually it is, I think it is generally considered that it is easier to approach selflessness if, first of all, one is able to recognize the selfless dharmas, because then one has an experience which counters the experience of individuality and unity of experience. But it's not fixed. I think that there might be a number of reasons for a specific teacher, which ideally should be clairvoyant, to introduce different things to different students. And I think that generally in the Buddhist tradition, one is supposed to start from merit, accumulating merit, through dana, shila, and in its many different forms. Because very often, if we don't accumulate merit, even if we study, we don't get much out of it. And people might not believe in this, and one could say, well, but if you show them the philosophy, then they find out why they should accumulate merit. Okay, that might be true, but there's something else that sometimes we underestimate, which is some, at least I think so, some of the activities which are connected to the accumulation of merit already make our mind more perceptive and more malleable. So actually our mind softens up through these activities, and even certain types of inner strong grasping or aggression that we might have and we cannot recognize easily becomes weakened by these activities connected to the accumulation of merit, even to devotional activities towards the 3 jewels, etc., etc. And this is going to be an immense help, I think, in the way we approach the philosophical texts. We can read a text in many, many different ways, and this is going to, I think, really affect the way we are going to absorb its many levels of meaning. So I think generally, just because we can only speak in general terms, it is a very common advice given that one has to accumulate merit, build up a strong foundation of trust in the 3 jewels, and then the philosophy will become clearer. And of course, Shila, Samadhi, and Prajna, something we discussed in the past, they support each other. So it is not such a fixed thing, but because the accumulation of merit is somewhat more accessible for most people, it is, I think, generally the case that one starts from that and then slowly can complement it and enrich it and go more and more towards deepening one's wisdom and slowly approaching selflessness. And even though it's true that right view should be there from the beginning, it's also true that that normally refers primarily to the view that karma is unfailing. That seems to be really emphasized. And the other point that is, I think, emphasized regarding how to approach selflessness is meditation on impermanence and especially on death. because that's a very good, clear way to understand the difference between knowing something conceptually and being affected by it. Because we can understand conceptually certain things about impermanence, but we can also see very clearly that all our activities are not in harmony with that very clearly understood concept. So that's where we can experience this gap between even a somewhat clearly understood concept and its more inner absorption. So this is another type of very significant preliminary that makes it easier to accept selflessness, the deep observation of impermanence. And some would even say that this level is still not deep enough. Because we say until you get really to appreciate momentariness, that type of coarse impermanence is not yet a sufficient preparation to a genuine understanding of selflessness. So there is even a more gradual approach. So I cannot really say there is one approach, but in general, I think this idea that one has to take some care about developing basic goodness through the accumulation of merit, and therefore through dana and shila, becoming developing an inner generosity and also a sense of restraint. I think that this is a common approach, and despite the exceptions, I think this is perhaps a little more common.
Thank you, Vatan. It's for me what I observe, like especially now when person have interest in Buddhism, it's usually from some, yes, of course, some from trying meditation. They're interested in this. Wow, meditation can bring something special to them. Or the other interesting point would be something like, wow, Buddha explained something which I couldn't have thought of. It's very interesting and it's very true. So this is there's a not just karma but like explanation of realities and phenomena, etc., etc. So I think these goes actually hand in hand, not exclusively just what do you call accumulations of merit. I think I think different people have different starting points, and I think now it's more wisdom is also draws a lot of interest as well. So a lot of teachers, they give public talks, I think, so people can recognize the flaws of their views. That's from my observation. Maybe you might have a different opinions on this, but please say so.
Well, there is one thing I'm observing about the description you're offering, and maybe I'm wrong, but you can tell me whether I'm understanding you correctly or not. You seem to primarily be describing people who were not Buddhist and then become interested in Buddhism. But you were asking about a general question, and I have to say that if you're asking a general question, that still constitutes a minority of the Buddhists in this world. So I was answering from the perspective of more generally, more broadly, what more frequently happens. So I cannot take the ones that you're describing, which happen to be a kind of exception rather than rule. The vast majority of Buddhists in...
But it's the title of the discussion today, Mattia.
Oh yeah? Sorry, what was the title of the discussion?
Mistaken views and misconceptions about Buddhism. So basically, I think that describes those who are somehow interested in Buddhism but not Buddhists.
Well, not necessarily, because Buddhists too can have misconceptions about Buddhism. So I didn't take it in that way.
But I think that, yeah, the general idea was that, like a general perception of Buddhism, a popular perception of Buddhism, in a way. I don't know if when we talk about a Buddhist view of Buddhism, maybe we are already at a subtle level.
I wish it was like that, Giuliano. I mean, if it is like that, I'll be very happy. if most of the people within the Buddhist tradition don't have misconceptions, I'm going to party for the next 2 weeks. So fantastic. But
I tend to place all those who have misconceptions in the category of secular Buddhism. So, but that's my flow. I understand that.
Okay.
That's my bad.
No, I understood it in a very general sense. In general, in the sense including Buddhists too. Like there are many mistaken views and misconceptions even among so-called traditional Buddhist, practicing Buddhist, hardcore Buddhist. So I think there are different levels of mistaken views and misconceptions. So I thought we were addressing all those.
All of them. But okay, then I would like to add something to this point. I was thinking about this title, since we are talking about the title. Now we go to a different. Actually, I would like to point out that misconceptions are not that bad. Because if we want to be really strict and we go back to the Madhyamaka view, any conception we have about the Dharma is a misconception in some way. So it's not a black and white situation. By default, we are going to approach the Dharma through some kind of misconception because that's the state we are in. So, in fact, some masters also point out that the people who I was saying in the beginning have the worst type of wrong view, but some masters point out that they also have a great potential to understand things right. So I think misconceptions also can be seen from that perspective. They are just one way of slowly approaching the right view, and I guess we, even as we are saying that others have misconceptions, but we also have some level of misconception, I think, unless we are Buddhas. So that makes the title a bit tricky.
Well, at one point, I was hoping that Ajahn Mattia would point to your initial question. I was going to your initial question. In the Mula Madhyamika Karika, I think chapter 24, at the beginning, there are series of objections by the Abhidharmikas, right? About the question you were asking, actually. That they say that they accuse Nagarjuna of being nihilist. Well, the translation is nihilist. That you do not accept anything. You say that nothing is there. So Four Noble Truths are there, not there, and so on and so forth. So how do you establish them? And then Nagarjuna, within first 10 or 11, 12 verses, I think he gives the idea what he's presenting and how it should be taken. So he introduces there two levels of truths, and then he says that without relying on the vyavahara, that is the, how do you say, like the relative things, the paramartha is not taught. Vyavaharam anastritya paramartho na desyati. I think that is the thing. So initially your question, I thought, was that you are denying the vyavahara too, in the sense the relative truth that we are leaving. And then I thought Ajahn Mattia would somehow bring the discussions in that chapter, but he did not. So I just brought it.
Yes, Giuliano?
Yeah, I was thinking of two things that Mattia said, actually. If we want to, maybe to... I was thinking about the merit, accumulation of punya, and what you just said about the importance of misconception. Because maybe we mentioned that last time when we talk about the characters and the opponents to the Buddha in the suttas. No, we see them as a Mogapurisa, no, they are stupid and so on, the misconception. And now, since we are talking about self and so on, and also about the Chatuscodi, we mentioned the Chatuscodi. So I thought of Bacciagotta, for instance, was in a way is emblematic in terms of a misconception, and on the other hand, it becomes an arahant. And in a way, we may say that it doesn't become an arahant only despite of misconception, but also because of misconception, in the sense that actually that's what pushes him to interrogate, to question the Buddha, and to, in a way, to have a deeper teaching or an appropriate teaching from the Buddha himself. So, an expressed and in a way we can say an aware misconception, strongly sustained, that may lead someone to a deeper understanding. And about punya, I thought of softening the mind. Last time we talked about the I don't know if you remember, I mentioned the Dantabhumi Sutta. No, the Buddha speaks softly, like the elephant trainer speaks softly to the ear of the elephant. No? In order to he speaks kind words in order to inspire kindness in the elephant, and therefore the elephant becomes ready for the teachings. So there is this preparation before. And since we are talking about the self, one of the definitions of the self is a pandita, is a spasm, is a contraction. So maybe sometimes we think that intellectually we may solve all the problem, but there are the anusayas. No? So there is this inner level where actually there is something that we should soften in order to understand. So in a way, if I don't understand, if there is no comprehension in me, it's also because I'm clinging to something. Really, my heart is contracted. A better way to decontract my heart is not by repeating explanations. It may work, but there are also other preparations that are important. And so generosity and so on.
Yeah.
That way I become ready, because there is this relaxation of the heart, and may become ready for deeper truths that actually I can totally neglect, just because, even if I intellectually understand them. No? So I can think, okay, I am a selfless process, but my selfless process is much better than Mattia's selfless process. So and this is the in a way the embodiment of the self view in a selfless view. I can think, okay, I don't believe in self, but my selfless process is way better than Mattia, and I really despise Mattia's selfless process. This actually may happen all the time. So if we want to place the discussion also in Buddhist circles, I think that we are all affected, no, by that, by this inner clinging to a self, which is maybe would be a little less intellectual than a not Buddhist person, but it's also proportionate to the way we let go of the self.
Yeah.
And
Interestingly, I think that sorry.
Better than yours.
Of course, I agree.
Okay.
No, I think also
in order to look more selfless than me, you agree? Yes. In order to look more selfless than me, of course. Yes.
But in fact, I was thinking that when we heard this question, most of us, at least myself, I answered talking about other people's misconception. And this is in itself quite telling, because it was just about misconceptions about Buddhism. I could speak of my own, but I cannot see the back of my own head. So this is a problem.
Maybe I can ask about how to go beyond. Let's say if you are an education minister in certain countries, how should the curriculum be formed in thinking to aid to go beyond this aristocratic or Aristotle's way of thinking of existence and non-existence, and to be able to go beyond these things. How is there like, of course, if we go too much Buddhism, it will be people might view as a religious. It becomes a religious nation. Is there a middle ground where we can establish a way of thinking, to have more openness and have more ease for children in the future to understand these philosophies?
Children. Isn't that a bit
Yeah, we have to
early?
start from children, I mean, or can be secondary school, primary school, but anyway, I mean, some sort of education. Because if we start nowadays, the education starts from what? Kindergarten, and it starts from, this exist, non-exist already, even before that. So,
I mean,
But
where did you go to kindergarten?
okay, Maria, please.
I did go to kindergarten from 2 years old, and then I went to school. And I remember how I met for the first time the notion of selflessness. I was absolutely unprepared. I was 14 and I was taking the course in world religions.
I was
Can you hear
absolutely
me all right?
unprepared. I was 14
Oh,
and I was
what's
taking
that?
the course in
What's
world religions. I
going
was
on with sound? I
I
can
was
hear
14
myself.
and I was taking the
Me too.
Yeah, that proves that something is selfless. It's speaking itself.
Should I try or should I shut up? I don't know. Anyway, so I opened the book on Buddhism, and it is said, I still remember, yeah, I never seen this book after that. It was like more than 20 years ago, and I read something like, there is no self, there are 5 skandhas, and the skandhas are perceived as one unity, while they are not. It looks like, if you have a burning stick, and you're turning this burning stick at night, and it makes an illusion of one circle, while there is no such a circle. There is just one burning stick. And I remember how I felt about it. I felt like, okay, but I know who I am. I remember who I was in my past life. I know that I'm not my body. It's okay. I never had problem with that. I could even see my body from the side as a kid, and so I didn't have this notion that I'm the body. But I still had this idea that there is something, like some consciousness, that is me, right? I remember who I was. I remember who I am. And so this is how I thought about it. And I was like, oh, it's something beyond me. And I just closed the book, and I didn't come back to Buddhism for another 10 years. So this is how it was. That's why I agree with what Dr. Mattia has said, that we should not introduce these things directly, not in the kindergarten, not at a school. We should first develop general softness. I like how Giuliano puts it, yes, softness, when we are actually receptive to such profound wisdom. Because if we are introduced to it in a wrong way, then we will misunderstand it. And I don't remember who was it, maybe Chandrakirti, who said those who think that things really exist are like cows, but those who think that they do not exist are worse than that, are more stupid than cows. It is great offense. You remember cows are holy animals, right? So this is something really bad. That's why we should avoid it, I think, because when we fall into extreme of thinking that nothing is there is no self, means there is nothing matters, there's no karma, no cause and effect. It is worse than thinking that there is a self. This is how it is usually presented. And I agree with what Dr. Mattia has said, that those who hold this view of self, they can change it, transform it quite easily, yeah, and it is not uncommon. For this reason, actually, in Tibetan, they're called motekpos. Motekpa means that they stand on the edge. So they are on the edge, so they can easily change it, yeah. But those who are like not, this is, I think, Guru Rinpoche in his treatise called them murtekpos. We can call them nihilist. Not Murtad, was Murtad. Anyway, so it's like those are very difficult to change. It is worse. That's why I wouldn't introduce it in the kindergarten. I wouldn't introduce it in school. I would teach children karma, cause and effect, that virtue results in happiness, non virtue results in suffering. This is most important to understand, to be responsible for one's own actions, not to blame others. All this is most important. And the rest they can find out when they accumulate enough punya. And then they can be introduced to the correct view and understand it correctly. Otherwise, there is a big danger of misconception, misunderstanding. So this is what I would say.
Thank you, Maria. Anybody have want to add or have a different opinion on this? Yes, Ajahn Matthew.
Mattia, we don't hear you.
I wanted to add something because although I'm not yet a Minister of Education, I have been somewhat involved with teaching to children. I mean, Bibek came with me once to Wendy. So I have given it some thought. And I was actually discussing even with our previous dean in Mahidol about a project for children in Thailand, around 12 years old, what to teach them. And also our own college, IBC, is connected to Tansiang, which is heavily involved with kindergarten education. So I've discussed this sometimes with Shifu, listening to what they do there. And personally, I feel that both at lower level, like kindergarten, but a little bit later as well, like middle school or high school, I think it's very important to teach children to become sensitive to more than using the word and their experiences as resources. So this, I think, is a big problem and something we have not yet touched upon. But in the Buddhist tradition, if you look at these people who are regarded to be having extreme view, their view of Uchedavada, of discontinuity, is very closely related to their view about relying heavily on the senses, on the five senses, and relying exclusively on the five senses. And I'm afraid that this is what is being mostly taught in schools. To the extent that now there is a widespread feeling that that's all what should be taught, and by which we mean we should study scientific subjects or the subjects which help us turn resources or our knowledge into resources by applying technology. So I think it would be better to emphasize some kind of wisdom for children, which can be very helpful. Even something similar, like in the Sanskrit tradition, there are subhashitas, which are common to all the traditions and which very often are learned even before one learns something which is specific from a certain religious tradition. There are fables like Panchatantra, you might have known. Some of them were even translated into Thai, and they were regarded as good educational tools. And you will see that interspersed there are lots of good sayings which extol virtues, not values, but virtues, which is a very different idea. And so if we encourage the natural quality of empathy, of appreciation for beauty, of empathy towards animals, of being sensitive and perceptive towards nature, or when one is in the presence of any other living being. If that's what we encourage in school, if we make it even as the main goal of education in children, then I think we are planting the causes and conditions for them to, first of all, be very decent human beings. And then if they have a kind of karmic propensity towards it, they might become good Buddhist practitioners. So in this way, we don't have to make the education very specifically Buddhist, especially for young children, but we can introduce these virtues which are highly valued in the Buddhist tradition and elsewhere, such as empathy, etc., etc. And it's not that this kind of education didn't exist in the past, but I think this kind of education is not the priority for the kind of job factory which is the contemporary school system. Unless we get out of a mentality that school and college, etc., is a preparation for the job market, there's no hope to inculcate something useful in the school system, in my opinion.
Thank you. Anyone else want to add on this? Maybe Ajahn Giuliano in terms of education, and Ajahn Bibek also.
Okay. Yeah, my experience with all the educational departments might be somehow similar to those Mattia had, because we worked together for so many years. So sometimes we found some resistance in some projects, in several ways. I may think there could be another problem in implementing policies of, I wouldn't say like Mattia Buddhist education, but in a kind of education that emphasizes selflessness in all the possible acceptations, so possible phases, like selflessness also in terms of lightness, of kindness, and so on. And I think maybe one problem that I would find is that in the need for self-education in a way, because I think that if most of the educational departments are university departments, or if we are talking about children, kids, I think of other I mean in primary schools, kindergartens, or whatever. I think that one problem could be if I try to teach a concept, even a Buddhist concept, even in the best possible phrasing, I think there could still be the problem that I may just convey a form of rigidity if I didn't do what is necessary. So I think that the formation of the teachers is also important. In a way, I think that one should ascertain that all the teaching faculties are ready for a task like that. Otherwise, I'm afraid that would be just a kind of, I wouldn't say brainwashing, but in a way would be just another form of I would say instruction to children, and they have many of them. So I don't know how much it works. Of course, it's good to reflect on things. So if someone stimulates reflections, that's actually good. But I think that one should have gone through those reflections way before sharing them with children. Otherwise, there is some risk of I would say inflationate the teachings by just spreading something that nobody really cared to investigate.
Yeah, maybe I.
Ajahn Bibek, yes.
One thing which I think is very important is that we are never taught anywhere to experience how we feel, how we think, our body, our mind. I think this is very crucial. What we do most of the time is send our children to the school and then make them think more and more thinking, right? So in a way, they are in such a conceptual world, uh, which is, sorry, maybe there was a problem with the internet. So we make them to think, but we never make them to experience our own body and mind. So what happens is that I have seen people who live their entire life not even experiencing in reality what they are. So if we want to bring them towards, let's say, Buddhism and eventually towards no self, at least they should be able to understand that uh, there is a body and there is a mind. It functions in certain way and be grounded within that body and mind. Right? Without grounding in the body and mind, what happens is that we never test the reality. We are actually just conceptualizing it to the extent that we are more and more far away. Of course, these conceptual wisdoms, these are useful in this world. For example, uh, any of the knowledge domains we can take, these are useful. But in reality, we never lived a life because we never experienced what is exactly happening within us and around our surroundings. So one thing, perhaps apart from the moral things that we have already talked, which is the basics of Buddhism, actually. So in the three siksha, first is the sila and samadhi and prajna, so on and so forth. Uh, but apart from that, apart from making them to become a good human being, I think that is only possible when they start to feel themselves, what is happening in the level of their body and in the level of their mind. So that is something grounding, I would say, that grounding is never there. And now we can see in this world that people are more addicted to computers, to video games, to so on and so forth, because they can never live with themselves, right? The problem here is that you don't want to live with the person you are 24/7 with. So you are actually always away from you, distracted completely, and in a conceptual world. So that brings a lot of problems. Actually, all the manias, phobias, and so on and so forth in this world actually is from the fact that we are not being able to live out with ourselves, with our loneliness, or whatever you can say, with us. So I think the grounding is very important if we want to teach them eventually the higher levels of Buddhist training.
Yes. Okay. Ajahn Mattia, I want to ask you, since you have taught in several countries and you're highly respected, of course, would you be able to name a school with such model that you have spoken about, or close to that?
You are muted, Mattia.
Well, the school I was mentioning is Wenli Academy, and I have very good experience there. You can see that the children. Now Vivek was talking about grounding the children, which is a bit abstract, but I think I understand what he means. And I think this is related to what I was saying about appreciating nature, etc., etc. And for example, in Wenli, they bring the children sometimes to sing poetry in the woods, or the children learn music. They learn wrestling. They learn some martial art. So they do activities which they do have this um, idea a bit of holistic education. Of course, I don't understand it fully because a lot was in Chinese, and therefore there's limitations to the extent to which I can follow what is happening. But I appreciate very much what they were doing, because I remember my own schooling, and at one point there's some subjects that I just stopped entirely studying. I refused to study them because I just at one point asked myself, but why? And I had no answer. And so I just stopped studying them completely. And to me, those were just completely wasted hours. I spent many hours sitting in mathematics class, biology, and I couldn't repeat a single word of anything I heard because I was half asleep most of the time. And if I had to be in those classes again, I would be half asleep again. I swear, I actually would never want to hear those things. So the point is, there was nothing much that I felt was in any way related to my own experience when I was learning in school. There was very little. There were some things, but there was not so much. And so, of course, we understand things retrospectively. So even at the time, I couldn't relate it. I could say, but now I understand that it was valuable. No, now I understand even more that it was worthless. So this is my educational experience from being a child. Most of what I was taught was completely useless. And if earlier I could say it just in matter of the intuitions of a child, now I can say it in retrospect with more conviction and like in hindsight. So I didn't see that in Wenli. I saw that there was um, really the ambition to instill, not even to instill, to let the natural propensity towards goodness grow, to offer the children the conditions to do that. And one can always criticize and say, okay, but this method could be done differently. But the basic point is having that intention. And I think this is what is lacking. Uh, the basic problem with the education that I find is that the intention is wrong. The intention with which the educational system is set up is wrong because it's not meant to offer knowledge. It's meant to offer technical skills that can then be spent on a market. And unless that intention changes, everything else is a very small cosmetic addition. So, long answer to a short question, but when the academy.
Thank you, Ajahn Mattia. That's very, very useful information, I think, for a lot of people, especially the audience here. Maybe I want to ask a question or maybe propose, or maybe you can suggest. Right now we are, I mean, mainly, the medium of communication is in English, because even among the Buddhist traditions, there are several languages, right? But now we are discussing in English. Are there some terminologies which we can, I don't know, create or use? For example, that's beyond exist or non-exist, and like beyond no or yes. Can we? Are there such terminologies, or can we create some sort of terminologies to extend the English vocab for better discussions, maybe in the coming years or so? I mean, not just this forum, but for Buddhist community in general. What's your view on this?
I think it's Maria's turn now.
Yes, please, Maria.
But I think it's not the problem of lack of terms. But as I said, Buddhist language of Buddhist logic is not intuitive, it is technical. So it is about definitions. And for example, if you ask what is lacking in the system of Buddhist education in which I am teaching now, this is basically it. Because like in traditional system, students spend at least 1 year studying Buddhist logic, and it is all about definitions. So they learn by heart definitions of everything. So when they speak to each other, they have a common ground because they know what they mean by certain terms. The problem with not traditional Buddhists, even those who engage into in-depth Buddhist studies, like for example at Ranju Yishi Institute, where I have studied and where I'm teaching now, people do not have this background of having definitions of every terms they use. That's why they lack common ground. And this is the main problem, as I see it. And also this is a problem of all this now so popular Buddhism and modern science dialogue, all these things, Buddhism psychology dialogue. But actually each of them speaks their own language. There is no common ground. And likewise, Buddhists, when we speak, do we actually have common ground? Like, for example, if I speak to a person who operates in a Tibetan tradition, then I can expect that at least we have a medium of Tibetan language where we have common ground. For example, my experience of learning from Dr. Mattia is that the Sanskrit space is much vaster. So, for example, those terms that I use in Tibetan start to make sense to me in Tibetan only when I learn from him what they mean in Sanskrit. For example, and this is not that I'm ignorant about terminology. I'm learning it for more than 10 years, but it is still so vast and so deep. That's why it's not about creating new words or creating new terms, but learning the meaning of those terms that we already have, those that we use. It's very important. Why we use certain words? Why the Buddha used certain words when he taught? Why he chose some words and not the others? For example, why he chose the term of anatman, no self. But, for example, he didn't choose the term of asamsara, I don't know, he took samsara as it is. But somehow he took atman and he made it into anatman. But what he meant by anatman, as we found out today, is not necessarily the negation of atman, it is beyond, right? So it is beyond non-existence of atman. It is both not existent or non-existence and all it, right? So, but these terms that he used, he also operated in a certain linguistic field of ancient India of that time, right? So he had to speak to the people whom he taught. He needed them to understand. So he was using certain words. For example, me as a Ukrainian, I come to the Dharma. I take these terms and I assume that I understand them without any background, right? But then I say words as anatman, and then I think that selflessness in English is same as anatman. I translate it into any other language I have a way to operate in, and I think this is same. Actually, it is not. That's why we need to be aware of it and go for the meaning, not go for the term. I think I said it last time, yeah, we have these 4 reliances. Not rely on the words, rely on the meaning. This is most important, I think, for everyone. And not necessarily for people who are just interested in Buddhism, but those who study Buddhism and those who study Buddhism deeply. Because also there is one misconception when people think that we can just take the terms and just use them, right? You know, it sounds fancy. We all speak like this jargon, Buddhist jargon, right? Very nice. No one understands. But do we actually understand the meaning? I doubt it. And I found out many ways that I myself do not understand these concepts fully. And there is still a deep field for learning to understand them. So this is what I would suggest, not creating new words, but just learning the definitions and the meaning of those terms that I used already. It's most important.
Thank you, Maria. Anything to add? Please feel free.
If I add a little thing, I don't know if you want to answer the random questions or if I may add something to what Maria just said. Up to you, Ram. Tell me what.
Please add.
Okay, no, I was actually struck by the clarification that Maria made about the negative part in anatta or anatman. Actually, maybe we consider them as a form of lacking something, absence of something, like having something less than the notion is. So there would be like a privation of something. the one could feel like I'm actually losing something. This may be the reason why the Buddha answers in silence, not to the notion of anatta, to the questions on anatta. But sometimes in Pali text we find, for instance, the compound aseka, no, asaiksha, Mattia, right? There would be one who doesn't, asaiksha. Who is not training, no, but it's not something who is incapable of training. It's an arahant, so means one beyond training. So the idea that there is not just privacy, but it's something that expresses, I would say, transcendence. If transcendence, we take it as not as a problematic term, but something anyway, being beyond that, not being without that. It's not just a without. It's without. The without is quite diminishing in this sense, but is beyond that. Like amata, it's not just without death, but it's beyond that. It's not. I am without death, so I'm not going to die any time. I will die, but the idea of amata is reaching a deathless condition. If a condition is the good term in this sense. So yeah, I think that clarifying the is much more than just a privation, just more than deprivation or a lack of something, so a loss of something that we actually care for. It's not that. It's going beyond the limits of the self. So when we consider the self as a limit, as a border that we are placed in, and like a prison itself. So beyond the prison is much better than without a shelter, because we consider an atma maybe like a lacking a shelter, whereas actually it's being outside the prison. Yeah,
I think, thank you, Giuliano. I think you just confirm what Maria has said. Like we have to understand, even among Buddhists, there could be miscommunication, so it's like this word is not a negation. So I think this comes to, it's also an answer to my initial question. So, which is non-self and selflessness, if I had to put it in English. I think this tends to create confusion, and this is exactly what Maria touched and what you did say just now exactly. Anything else, Dr. Mattia and Ajahn Bibek? Anything to add on the creation of terms or anything like this? Otherwise, we go to the question and answers.
I think it's good if you go to the question and answer.
Okay, so we have a question from Junyang Ng. Considering selflessness, what suffers the consequences of an action? Any taker?
Sorry, yes, but I have a question for Junyang first before trying to answer. I'm not sure whether this was a question or whether this was meant as a proposal to rephrase your initial question, Ram. I think to me it looks like he was trying to find a more precise way to rephrase what you had initially asked. Junyang, if you're there, could you clarify?
Okay, for the time being, we can maybe go to the next question, if possible, from Tarunoma Ilam. The Buddha said that selflessness is a desire in the family of greed, but I am not sure I am mistaken or not.
Selfishness.
Yes, sorry, selfishness. The Buddha said that selfishness is a desire in the family of greed, but I'm not sure I am mistaken or not.
I have problem understanding this question. So, okay.
Well, I think maybe I understand what she means.
Okay.
I think it's about the classification of chaitas. So there is one chaita, and maybe she's thinking of Matsarya, and Matsarya is classified under Raga. So if I understand correctly, this is a kind of a question about the relationship between more specific mental states and one of the basic mental afflictions, which is greed. So probably she's right, because we don't know exactly selfishness, which Chaita is translating. So it's difficult to answer with precision.
Yes, Jun Yang Eun has stated this was a paraphrase for Ram's initial question. Thanks. Yes, okay, so that has been clarified. Do we have any more questions from the audience? I don't see anything. So I think it's about time we should end this. Do you have any final remarks or suggestions, comments? Please feel free before we go to the announcements and dedication.
If I may say, I think that in the last questions about the Shaita and about the selfishness as a form of greed, maybe we should keep in mind that when we talk about self, we are talking about aham mama. Is I am, and I have, both. So it's about being and possession. Being as in the sense of limits, of identifying with the self, and possession, having something. They usually go together. Ahankara, mamankara, making a self and making a mind. So I think in this sense, when we talk about greed, we know how we are talking about self in this sense, about atta in this sense.
Thank you. Any concluding remarks, comments, or recommendations from any of you, please?
Yeah, maybe a few words. Well, selflessness is a big topic which has already been said. There is a tendency among the people to jump into the higher and profound teachings without understanding or without going through the basics of Buddhism, for example. What I have seen is that most of the confusions come when we go to the higher tenets and then we forget the basic things that has been said in the Abhidharma, for example, that we do not, we somehow do not consider this kind of teachings important, and we do not consider building up slowly to go towards the teachings of not only self, well, mostly I'm talking about shunyata or emptiness, complete selflessness of the dharmas. So my suggestion for all those would be to um, uh, first study the basics that Buddha taught, that there is 5 aggregate, and then the 12 ayatanas, 12 entrants and dhatus, and how the mind and body functions, and so on and so forth, which is within the Abhidharma. And then properly understand what is being negated, because if we negate in such a way that we negate even these 5 aggregates, 12 ayatanas, and the bases, even in the relative level, then we come to a very wrong conclusion. That's what Nagarjuna would be saying in, that's what Nagarjuna would say, someone holding um, the sarpa. Sarpaha is a snake. by its tail. So when we catch a snake by its tail, normally what happens is like we are bitten easily, right? So sarpaha durgrahitaha, I think that's what he has used in that chapter 24. So my suggestion would be to go gradually, learn from the basics to understand what is at least uh, existent in the relative level. Then yeah, that is that is the sarpahaya. So and then what is being negated exactly, so that we do not misconstrue the meaning of emptiness and go towards nihilism or any other towards any other wrong direction. That's what I would like to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Ajahn Bibek. Okay, anybody else? Okay. Otherwise, we can conclude this here, and thank you very much. We hope to have some interesting misconceptions in the future, and we will discuss about them perhaps in the coming weeks or months again, and I hope you all will be able to join us. We have some announcements. That our next event of the Satwa project is on the 13th February. Malaysia time is at 8 p.m. It will be a guided Zen meditation by Venerable Myong An Sunim on the topic of no mud, no lotus, no mud, no lotus, which is a very common theme in Buddhism and also very profound. And so now we can perhaps go to the dedication. May I invite dedication from different traditions? Maybe we start with Giuliano and then Sanskrit tradition and then also Tibetan tradition. And we can say the 4 great vows and then we can end the session tonight. So may I invite Ajahn Giuliano for dedication?
Suko viveko tuttassa, sudada massa passata vyapajam, sukam loke panambute sosamyamo, sukha viragata loke kamanam samatikamo, asmi mana sayo vinayo, etambe paraman sukham. Seclusion is happiness for the one who hear and see, who hear the Dhamma and see. Friendliness or non-aversion is happiness, restraint with regard to all beings. Restraint from sense pleasures is happiness. The supreme happiness is the end of the conceit of self. I am. The conceit of I am, asmi mana.
Thank you, Giuliano. May I invite Ajahn Mattia on maybe Sanskrit?
यदवाप्तं मया पुण्यं स्तुत्वा त्वां स्तुतिभाजनं निमित्तबन्धनापेतं भूयात्तेनाखिलं जगत्.
Can you please give a brief translation in English, please?
Whichever merit I have obtained by praising you, who are the worthy receptacle of praise, by this merit, may the whole world be free from the bondage of signs.
Thank you, Ajahn. And maybe Maria in Tibetan, if possible.
Okay. Janchub samchok rinpoche makya panam kya Kyavanyam Vamapayam Gone, gone, May the precious mind of awakening bodhicitta arise where it has not yet risen, where it has risen, may it not decrease, but increase further and further.
Thank you. And Ajahn Bibek, I believe you're also a Sanskrit specialist, which Ajahn Mattia has already said a dedication. So may I invite you to read the 4 great vows on behalf of us all.
Okay. So the 4 great vows, I think this is from the Avatamsaka, right? So sentient beings are numberless. We vow to save them all. Delusions are endless. We vow to cut through them all. The teachings are infinite. We vow to learn them all. The Buddha way is inconceivable. We vow to attain it. May all sentient beings be well, happy, and safe.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.